active shooter inside the warehouse.
We're going to get trampled if we don't go.
Control, that is correct. Shots fired from Mandalay Bay. There's many people down. Stage left.
We have multiple casualties. GSW in the medical tent. Multiple casualties.
At first, people mistook the sound of gunfire for fireworks. They were, after all, at a country music festival. But from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel, gunman Stephen Paddock was carrying out what would become America's worst mass shooting in the 21st century. By the time police reached his room, Paddock had killed himself. They did find more than 20 guns, but in the immediate aftermath, no clues as to what led him to open fire in the first place.
No, man, I can't get into the mind of a psychopath at this point.
My fellow Americans, we are joined together today in sadness, shock, and grief.
America is once again in mourning. From the lawns of the White House to the grounds of a Las Vegas football field. A nation united by tragedy, yet divided on how to reduce the growing number of victims from gun-related violence. In 1996, the United Kingdom and Australia each experienced the terror of a shooting massacre.
It seems unreal. I can't even understand anyone doing anything like this.
The attacks changed the gun ownership debate in those countries. Both governments introduced stricter gun laws, and there was even a gun buyback scheme for banned weapons. 2 decades on, the American Journal of Medicine published a study about violent death in the US. It found the gun-related murder rate in America was 25 times higher than many other high-income nations, including the United Kingdom and Australia. Statistics aside, there is another striking difference between the countries. The US is home to arguably the most powerful gun lobby on the planet, the National Rifle Association. It is an avid defender of the Second Amendment, which grants Americans the constitutional right to bear arms. It's also been the major political advocate for encouraging gun ownership and greater access for citizens to purchase weapons. That's a position that hasn't changed, even as the title of worst mass shooting passes from one massacre to the next. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from Washington is John Lott. He is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center and author of The War on Guns, Arming Yourself Against Gun Control Lies. And with me here in the studio is Borzou Daragahi. He is a senior editor at Buzzfeed News. Thanks so much, both, for joining us on The Newsmakers. Let me start where our report actually left off. Why is it that when the UK and Australia had one gun massacre, gun laws were immediately amended to save lives, yet the US has had multiple massacres and gun laws remain unchanged? John Lott, I'll let you field that first.
Well, look, much of the rest of Europe has similar laws to what the UK has. You know, in France, you can't even own a semi-automatic rifle, and yet you look at the mass public shootings that have occurred there. In 1 year, 2015, they had 532 casualties from mass public shootings. That's more than occurred for mass public shootings in the United States over the entire 8 years of the Obama presidency.
Are you saying mass shooting casualties are higher in France?
It's clear that they have.
I'm not sure these statistics are at all correct.
France.
Go ahead.
If you use the FBI definition of mass public shootings, which traditionally has been 4 or more people killed in a public place, not as part of something like a gang fight or some other type of crime, but where it's like this Las Vegas attack or the ones at the concert hall in France where they're just trying to go and kill people. So you're comparing apples to apples on this. In fact, Europe has had as high or higher rates of casualties from mass public shootings than the United States has, whether you go back
But
from
Mr. Lott,
1970
the people
to the
who
present,
perpetrated
or whether
these
you
crimes
go,
in
yes,
France,
during
for
the Obama
example,
administration.
were using illegal guns. They had obtained guns illegally.
Right.
In the United States, these are legal gun owners that perpetrate these crimes.
Well, two things. One is the fact that it was illegal didn't stop all those mass public shootings from occurring in France. You're right. They keep on using machine guns. Semi-automatic guns aren't even allowed in France, but yet somehow these guys were able to get a hold of machine guns, and that's true in Belgium. It's true in other places. And of course, during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you'd have groups like Black September and the Biner Meinhof gang that would go into airports and discos and other places with machine guns and kill lots of people. And so if you look at the overall period of time, again, whether it's during the Obama administration or longer. Now, the big thing here is that despite U.S. regulations, this is the first time that we've had a mass public shooting involving a machine gun in the United States.
Okay, but I mean, let me ask Borzou then, because the argument here always is that bad guys
in Europe and around the rest of the world.
You asked a very good question at the beginning, and I think we should get at it. Why, and that was not answered, and that we should try to answer. Why have these mass casualties events in other parts of the world? Hold on one second, you spoke. Why have they provoked responses and public responses in all these other countries and have basically brought upon government changes in those countries and not in the U.S.? I think there's several reasons, but I think the main reason is that despite public pressure and public opinion repeatedly from the public demanding more gun control, the U.S. government is captured. It is basically corrupted by the gun lobby, and this is something that has to be addressed, something that has to be looked at, has been manipulated by the gun lobby, has been paid off by the gun lobby. If you look at the amount of money that the gun lobby pours into the political campaigns of pro-gun politicians, it's extraordinary. And in addition to that, there's the sort of threat that if you take on a popular anti-gun position or pro-regulation position, you will face a primary challenger that will defeat you in these elections. So basically, they've manipulated the political system in order to be able to sell these weapons, much as the same way a generation ago the tobacco industry captured the U.S. government.
Okay, Mr. Lott, let me just break down your argument then to say that you believe bad guys will get their hands on guns anyway, regardless of what the legislation is, so there is no need to change laws.
Well, I think it's actually even worse than that in many cases, but I just want to make it clear, the reason why I was bringing up the comparison there was to show what many people believe, and that's the point that you're raising now, that these laws may either do no good or may actually do harm. So one of the laws that we have in the United States is you have guns banned from certain areas. And yet what you find time after time is these mass killers, not in this case, but very frequently, go after places where they know victims can't defend themselves. You have statements, we have diaries and other things where these people have explicitly made these types of claims. But I also just want to briefly address the person on the other side's comments about money. If you look at the amount of money that Michael Bloomberg, who's a big gun control advocate, donated to federal elections over the last 2 election cycles, he donated over $48 million.
Yeah, but not on a single
During that
issue.
same period
over
of time,
many different issues, because he has a multifaceted agenda that people, politicians like that. It's not explicitly about gun control.
It was only to people that agreed with him on the gun issue. I let you speak. Only to people that agree with him on the gun issue got the money. By contrast, the NRA spent $2.1 million. If you look at state legislative races, Bloomberg outspends the NRA many times even more than that. He outspends the NRA and all the other pro-self-defense groups by 7.5 to 1 on television ads. That is from Advertising Age.
Okay.
And I'm happy to send you a link afterwards.
Yes, I would actually like to
and you can go to opensecrets.org to see what the donations were.
I'd like to move on to another issue specifically about this tragic mass shooting. Some people are saying that this will be the tragedy that actually finally changes minds. And we have, for instance, Caleb Keeter, who is a country music guitarist who performed just before Jason Aldean took the stage. He tweeted this: "I've been a proponent of the Second Amendment my entire life until the events of last night. I cannot express how wrong I was. We actually have members of our crew with CHL, concealed handgun licenses, and legal firearms on our bus, and those were useless. We need gun control right now. My biggest regret is that I stubbornly didn't realize it until my brothers on the road and myself were threatened by it." Borzou, do you think this opinion is a one-off or will prove rare, or do you think that this actually is changing the tide of public opinion in America?
I think it just doesn't matter anymore what public opinion in America is on certain issues, on many issues. I think that the U.S. government is completely dysfunctional right now. I call it the American fitna at this point, what's happening in the U.S., what's happening in Washington. I don't think that anything will come out of what happened here. But I just want to address one thing that this country western singer said, and I think it's a nuance that needs to be explored and highlighted. You can be pro-Second Amendment, as many people I know are. You can be pro people having the right to own guns, keep guns in their homes for their own protection, and to use them for sports. I know a lot of people, I grew up in Illinois, and a lot of people I know were hunters, or they would go and do target practice, and they're completely within their rights. But also be an advocate of some kind of regulation, you know, some kind of controls on the sales of guns and ammunition and so on, and still be a supporter of the U.S. Constitution.
John, let me first get your personal opinion on that tweet from Caleb Keeter. Does it affect you at all to hear someone who so grew up as a proponent of the Second Amendment change his mind because of this tragedy on his doorstep?
Well, I mean, I've changed my mind the other way because of my research. I mean, I can give you, and he mentions the concealed carry permit holders. You can go to our website at crimeresearch.org. We have many dozens of cases where sheriffs, prosecutors, or police have said that mass public shootings have been stopped because of people with concealed handgun permits. Now, this was a very unusual case, from this guy firing from the 32nd floor of a hotel into a crowd of 22,000 people from a significant distance. It's true. In this case, having a concealed handgun permit wouldn't have made any difference at all. But there's lots and lots of cases. We just had a case just in the last week where a church shooting was stopped in Nashville, Tennessee, because somebody had a concealed handgun.
Okay.
These types of cases usually don't get much more than local news coverage.
There are some nuances here, then, in that perhaps there's an argument to be made for handgun possession, but when assault rifles, for example, can still be obtained by ordinary citizens just because they don't have a criminal record, then maybe you have a problem. One of the arguments against you is that guns have changed. Physically, guns have changed. They are no longer the muskets that existed when these laws were originally written in the United States. Guns have changed. Our laws should change as well. Why don't you think there should be a progression here to adapt to changing technology?
Well, look, this is the first mass public shooting in the United States that involved a machine gun. As I mentioned, you have lots of cases in Europe involving machine guns. At least at this point in time, it appears that he illegally obtained the gun. There's very substantial criminal penalties that are already imposed on people if they were to go and illegally obtain a machine gun that's there. You know, when you talk about, normally when people use the term assault weapon or military style type weapon, people think of machine guns. They think of these fully automatic guns. But in fact, they just look like that on the outside. The inside guts of them is the same as any semi-automatic hunting rifle. Now, if you want to ban all semi-automatic guns, then let's have that discussion. But to go and ban a certain set of guns simply because they look on the outside like military weapons, but no military in the world would use them, they function the same as any small game hunting rifle, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And there's a reason why the proponents of gun control go after the looks of guns rather than how they function, and that is people realize how beneficial semi-automatic guns are to protecting them. There are three types of guns. There's manually loaded guns. You fire the gun, you have to physically put a bullet in the chamber again yourself. Semi-automatic, you fire a bullet, it automatically reloads. You pull the trigger once, one bullet comes out, it reloads. And then you have machine guns where you pull the trigger, and as long as it's depressed, you have many bullets coming out. These semi-automatic guns, if I have multiple people attacking me, or I miss on my first shot, people may not have the luxury, when the police aren't there to protect them, to be able to go and take the time to manually reload another bullet in the chamber.
Okay.
I just don't think it's, I don't think that many Americans, and I think that many Americans would agree with this position, that it's not unreasonable to, at the very least, impose the same kind of restrictions on gun ownership, which is, it should be a privilege, that we impose on drivers. That is like, extensive training, licensing, monitoring of the vehicle and so on, registration of those weapons, basically scrutiny of people who seem to be doing something strange with the car. I mean, if someone is stockpiling weapons, and has bought 100 guns in the last month, I think that's a warning sign, and law enforcement should go over and say, hey, Joe, what's up? Why'd you buy 100 guns in the last month? I think that's just, in this age with the terrorism everywhere and war everywhere and guns everywhere, I think it's reasonable to scrutinize gun ownership the same way we would scrutinize a car ownership.
Go ahead, John Lott.
Look, you only have to have a license or the training when you carry the gun, when you drive in public. And that's the same way the concealed carry laws are. If you have your car on your own property, you don't need to go through that. If you have a gun on your own property, you don't need to do that. But we already have concealed handgun permits, which does what you say. The difference is that driver's licenses are more liberal. Once you get a driver's license, you can go and drive across the whole country. You're not allowed to do that with a concealed carry permit because there are lots of states like New York or Illinois or California that stop you from being able to do that. So if you want to make them similar, fine, but that would actually liberalize the laws and make it so that concealed carry permit holders would have more rights than they have currently, which is the reciprocity bill that's before Congress right now.
Mr. Lott, if another similar massive gun attack takes place next week in the United States that claims more innocent lives, will you budge at all on your position? Or is this the position that gun lobbyists in the United States will take in perpetuity?
Well, I don't know what gun lobbyists are going to do. I'm a researcher. I've been an academic most of my adult life. And as I say, I've changed my views on guns because of the research showing how many times people on net benefit from having guns for protection. Look, I mean, it'd be great if the police were there all the time to protect people, but they're not. The police almost always arrive on the crime scene after the crimes occurred. And there's a reason why the overwhelming majority of police support either gun ownership, private gun ownership, or they support concealed carry laws. The problem that you have with a lot of these gun control laws is people were talking about different gun control laws before they even knew any of the facts. So yesterday morning, within hours of the attack, you had people talking about, well, we just need to have certain types of background checks. Well, it turns out it wouldn't have stopped the attack.
Okay.
You had after the Alexandria shooting when a Bernie Sanders supporter went after the Republican congressman, you had people like Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic governor from Virginia, going down a whole list of gun control laws that he said would stop those attacks. Well, it turns out that the guy bought his guns in Illinois, which already had all the laws that he was saying we needed to have. And the same thing was true with President Obama. President Obama kept on talking about a particular types of background checks, and it wouldn't have stopped one of the mass public shootings during his administration. That's the problem with the people who are pushing the gun control. They don't actually engage
John,
in what would have stopped those attacks that they're talking about.
We just have a few seconds left, and I want to give Borzou a quick final word.
Well, I mean, it's a horrible thing that has happened, and the bottom line is that there's too many guns in the United States, too many weapons. There's too few restrictions on getting those weapons. We didn't even talk about gun fairs and how people buy these weapons at gun fairs and circumvent some of the processes here. We didn't talk about online and all these other markets for weapons. And this is a big problem right now. And the public is on board with greater regulations and greater scrutiny that are short of out-and-out bans of any kinds of weapons.
Okay, Borzou, I'll let you have the last word. I'd like to thank you and John Lott so much for joining us from Washington, D.C. there on the Newsmakers.